Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Mycenaeans in our continuing study of the history of civilization. Let's go back again to the Aegean. We noticed last time that you have Crete, and to the east you have the mainland of Anatolia, and between these are the Cyclades, these islands that just fill the Aegean Sea. Greece itself has a very irregular coastline. If you just follow the coast, it's not nice and sloping. It's zigzagging in and out. It's very mountainous in that area. But those zigzags of that coastline mean that there's lots and lots of natural harbors. Whereas the land itself is just full of mountains, that's going to turn the people both to the sea, and also the fact that those mountains they're covered with trees, and they're great for shipbuilding. And the Greek people are going to, largely, a lot of them are going to be people of the sea. Especially when you look at the Cyclades, these islands that stretch from the Greek mainland all the way across to Anatolia, and also to Crete in the south, that you can sail across there and never lose sight of land. And if you're just learning how to sail, you don't want to lose sight of land. You don't want to be lost out there in the sea. But you can always be close to land, and that's good. Now, the Greek name for Greece is not Greece. They've never called themselves Greece. That's what we refer to them. They refer to their own country as Hellas. They are Hellenistics. They are Greeks. Their country is Hellas. And of course, we have the island of Crete to the south. Actually, Crete's a very ancient name, so they did call themselves Crete, and that's the name by which they were known. So that has stuck. When we talk about cultures, there's two basic types. Now, there's other types too, but these are going to be contrasts: a mercantile culture versus a heroic culture. In a mercantile culture, they value peace. In a heroic culture, it's all about war. They value war. They want to be at war all the time. In a mercantile culture, they gain profit through commerce and trading, and the Minoans were a mercantile culture. But when we turn to the Mycenaeans, they have a different value system in place. They're all about gaining loot through raiding. That's what they do. It's who they are. And so what happens when a heroic culture clashes with a mercantile culture? Well, if they're relatively equal, the heroic culture is going to be going to war, and the mercantile culture says, wait a minute, we don't want to fight, we just want to trade with you. And the heroic culture is, no, that's not what we do. What we do is go and just take whatever we can. And so we have the Mycenaean group, the Mycenaeans, and there's actually a city of Mycenae. It's located, you can actually see the Mediterranean from the city, although it's high up on a hill, on a ridge. And they're going to come in contact with the city of Troy. And it's Homer that tells us the story in the infamous Iliad. Iliad's a epic poem. Poetry, yes, but also telling a story. And the story starts off where there's Paris, who has been sort of recruited by Zeus to be the referee in a beauty pageant. And Aphrodite and Athena and Hera, these three beautiful goddesses, they each try to bribe him, and they offer him either great military prowess, or they offer him to be ruler of the world, or they offer him the most beautiful woman, and he's in the world, and he's sort of young and dumb, and so he chooses the most beautiful woman in the world. Not that that's bad, but think about it. If he was the greatest military guy, if he was the greatest king in the world, he could go get the most beautiful woman. But he doesn't think through that, and so he chooses Helen. Now, back then she's known as Helen of Mycenae because she's already married. You would think he'd find out, oh, gee, she's already married. Maybe I'll find the second most beautiful woman in the world. But he doesn't. He's young and dumb, and he takes Helen, and he takes her back home to his hometown, Troy. And so she becomes Helen of Troy. And the Mycenaeans see that as very dishonorable to them. The wife of one of their kings has been stolen. Yes, she ran away. She was sort of in on it, but that doesn't matter. That was a great affront, and now there's going to be a war of honor. And not just the king of Mycenae, but all of his, all those who are, what's the word for it, that are allied with him. And so we're going to have Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. She's supposed to be that beautiful. And so not just Mycenae, but all of the Greek cities will go and invade Troy. And when Herodotus tells us the story, and Herodotus does tell us the story, he tells us that it was a battle between East and West, that it was a battle between Europe and Asia. The two conflicting cultures are coming together and clashing as the very early Greeks invade Troy. And of course, in the Iliad, that battle focuses on the two heroes. The hero of the Greeks is Achilles, who was a great and awesome warrior, and Hector, he's the sort of Prince Royal of Troy, and they actually at the end of the Iliad they go into combat, and Achilles, in all of his anger, kills Hector, and it's a sign of what's to come, of the Mycenaeans and the Greeks overcoming Troy and destroying that city. Now, Homer went on to tell another story, and his other story is the Odyssey. It's like a part two. It's the rest of the story. It picks up where the Iliad left off, and it begins with a story of how they'd been besieging Troy for 10 years and unable to take it, and so they come upon a plan. Actually, it's King Odysseus. He's king from one of the smaller island kingdoms in Greece, Ithaca, and the plan is to leave a big, giant wooden horse outside the city, and they pretend that they've gone away in defeat, and the horse is sort of a congratulatory statue that says, look, this is for you, and whoever has this horse within the city, that city will never fall. Of course, it's all a ruse, because hidden inside the horse, notice you see the little windows, but then that's just for us to see in. Hidden inside the horse were soldiers that were waiting within. There's a saying that we have, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. And so the gift of the Greeks was this Trojan horse, and the Trojans brought it inside their city. And then when everyone was asleep that night, Odysseus and his soldiers came out of the horse, and they opened the city gates. And meanwhile, the Greeks had snuck back to the area of Troy, and they captured the city, and they destroyed it. Now the story goes on to say that Poseidon, the god of the sea, was offended when they looted his temple in Troy. And so now as everyone's going home, and the Odyssey is the story of everyone going home after work. They've been away for 10 years, and they all begin to go home. And Odysseus, in particular, is going to follow his travels as he comes to Ithaca, but it's going to take him 10 years to get back home. And it's not just that he's stopping for lunch or something like that, but he runs into one difficulty after another, and it's a long journey home, and when he finally gets home, he has to fight to regain his kingdom because, well, other things have happened. So it's not it ends up being a happy homecoming, but after much fighting and bloodshed and sorrow and things like that. So we have Mycenae and Troy, and these are two actual places. It was Heinrich Schliemann who first discovered, he's going to end up discovering both of these. He was a businessman, an American businessman, who had this passion for Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and had come to believe these were real places, and he collected enough money where he could retire and go and search for these places, and that's exactly what he did. He discovered Mycenae, and as we noticed, that was up on a very, very large hill. Here's an artist's conception of what it would have looked like back in the days, in its glory days, before 1200 BC. Big palace. Notice the heavy walls. Very different than Crete, which was known as a land of unwalled cities. Here again is a artist's conception. This is like a model of the ruins as they looked today. Now we'll zoom in and actually see some of those ruins. At one point, he uncovered I guess what you could call a death mask, a mask laid that had originally been over a corpse, and he described it, and the name stuck. He called it the Mask of Agamemnon. I have looked into the face of this king of heroic fame in the Iliad. I've looked on the face of Agamemnon. Of course, it probably wasn't Agamemnon. Very doubtful that it would be, but still reflects that ancient culture. Here's another. This is actually a ceremonial sword. Yes, the blade is sort of corroded, and you can see on the left the brass plates that sort of hold it to its hilt. But the image itself in here is of hunters with a lion. And notice in particular the shields, the body on the very left we have a figure 8 shield. You have another one about midway, and then but they're very large shields that sort of take in almost the entire person. Remember how in the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, where you read not just about warriors, but about their armor bearers. See, the armor bearer would be carrying that big, heavy shield, and that's a full-time job, and he would need to do that. That's the same culture that we are looking at here in the Mycenaeans. Here's the remnants. They were able to sort of put together the best they could one of these big figure 8 shields. And as we noted, we have not just linear A, but linear B now is going to be a very early form of Greek. Another picture of pottery, a chariot, sort of, again, the warfare theme. And this is a culture that had been impacted by the Minoans. Apparently they had had some dealings one with the other, and yet it's going to come and overshadow the Minoans. Standing here by the Lion's Gate in Mycenae, notice the big, heavy blocks that make up the wall. These are known as Cyclopean architecture. The stones are so big that it was reckoned only the Cyclops could have come, and these big one-eyed giants could have come and built these walls. Now, it didn't take Cyclops, but it's very impressive when you look at the very heavy stone walls of the Mycenaean fortresses. Here we're looking at the beehive grave. If you go inside, it's got a very high domed ceiling, and I found this reminiscent somewhat of the graves that we saw at Ugarit. Now, the Minoans versus the Mycenaeans. The Minoans, they lived in a land of unwalled cities. After all, the ocean was their wall. They had their navy, and they were protected. The Mycenaeans, they had heavy walled fortress cities. And the Minoans, their houses have a collection of rooms with a central courtyard. With the Mycenaeans, the houses have a central meeting hall with a fireplace along one wall. Think sort of rugged. Maybe it helps to think of them, and I don't mean to be rude here, but to think of them a bit as rednecks. With the Minoans, they're smooth shaving. With the Mycenaeans, these men are they're depicted wearing beards. The Minoans, on their walls, they have paintings of social gatherings and plants and animals and trees and religious scenes. And that doesn't mean they couldn't be violent, but that's the way that's what they valued. And that's the way they pictured upon their walls. And the Mycenaean paintings have a tendency to focus on military nature. Yes, there's some hunting scenes as well, but it's all about physical acts of prowess and violence and fighting. Now, let's move over to Troy, and we've got a number of different levels, 9 different levels that we find in Troy, 9 different times that Troy was built and then either destroyed or sort of, and it's Troy 7a that is going to be the Troy of Homer. And so let's look across this is taken from the valley, look from the ruins, looking out across the valley, and of course in the distance you have the Mediterranean. So that Troy is not right on the sea, but rather is located several miles inland. It's now been reconstructed where some of the walls, and you can walk around the various walls of Troy. You can also see just within one dig a number of the different levels. Notice the little Roman numerals. You've got level 2 down below, and then level 3 to the left, and then level 4 further back. And you can find the different levels in the strata of the building and destruction and rebuilding of the city of Troy. So here again, a culture that valued battle, that came into battle, is pictured as coming and attacking Troy. And we've already discussed the story of the Trojan horse, how this big giant horse was moved as a subterfuge, as a trick to allow the Greeks to sneak in and capture the city of Troy. Now, as that happened, and Homer's story, he writes it in 800 BC, around there, but he is writing about an earlier period, and that takes place around 1200 BC. And as that's happening, we have a period of migrations. First of all, we've got peoples coming from the north, and we actually have, eventually, Mycenae itself is going to be destroyed, along with a great many other of the Mycenaean cities. We have groups that move across into Crete and take Crete and destroy the civilization there. We have, in the story of in the Trojan War, we have Greeks that sail across the Aegean and capture Troy, and we know that Troy was indeed destroyed around this time. But not only that, there were other peoples that were set into motion. It was almost like when you have these dominoes all in a row. One domino doesn't knock all the others down, but it starts a chain reaction. And in this chain reaction, we had people coming across and across Anatolia, across the Halys River, and bringing an end to the Hittite civilization. We have another group known as the Sea Peoples, remember in the days of Ramses III, coming down and seeking to invade Egypt, and he barely holds them off with he calls it a sea battle, but it's really a battle on the Nile, and holds them off. And we also have a group that settles after this on the coastline of Canaan, known as the Philistines. Now, there'd been a previous group. It seems like there'd been a previous group from the Minoans, but now we have a group related to the Mycenaeans who move in now and settle along the coast of Canaan. Which means when we read about the Philistines and David and Goliath, that it is entirely possible that the ancestors of Goliath, maybe his father, well, not father, but grandfather or great-grandfather, maybe they had fought at Troy. Because after all, we have a flow of the same culture, and when we read about Goliath and his shield, armor bearer, and his weapons, maybe we ought to envision the same culture of Mycenae that had now been transplanted to Canaan.